Revenue deficit occurs when the government's revenue expenditure exceeds its revenue received during a financial year. Revenue received include income from taxes and non-tax sources, while revenue expenditure covers regular expenses such as salaries, pensions, subsidies, and interest payments. In simple terms, revenue deficit shows the government is spending more on daily operations that it earns, forcing it to borrow even to meet routine expenses. This situation is considered unhealthy for an economy because borrowing should ideally be used for development, not consumption. Calculation of revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is calculated using a simple formula. Revenue deficit equal to revenue expenditure minus revenue received. Example, if revenue expenditure 40 lakh crore and revenue received is 35 lakh crore, revenue deficit equal to 40 minus 35 equal to 5 lakh crore. If revenue expenditure is higher than revenue received, the result is a revenue deficit. If revenue receipts are higher, the government records a revenue surplus. A continuous revenue deficit indicates poor fiscal discipline and rising financial stress on the government. What is effective revenue deficit? Effective revenue deficit is defined as the difference between revenue deficit and grants for capital assets, showing the actual gap in the government's revenue account after accounting for spending that leads to asset creation. Effective revenue deficit equal to revenue deficit minus grants for capital assets. Effective revenue deficit highlights how much of the revenue deficit is truly unproductive in nature. If the effective revenue deficit is zero, it means the government's borrowing are being used for capital formation rather than routine consumption, which is considered a positive sign for economic growth. Revenue deficit in India. Revenue deficit in India is on a declining trend, reflecting improved fiscal discipline and better revenue management by government. It is expected to reduce from 4.8% of GDP in financial year 24-25 to 4.4% of GDP in financial year 25-26, indicating a gradual narrowing of the gap between revenue receipt and revenue expenditure. This decline suggests efforts toward controlling routine expenditure, improving tax collection, and reducing dependence on borrowings for day-to-day government spending, which is a positive sign for India's overall fiscal health. Revenue deficit impact. Increases government borrowing. A revenue deficit forces the government to borrow even to meet routine expenses, leading to higher public debt and future repayment pressure. Reduces capital expenditure. Funds that should be used for infrastructure, education, and healthcare are diverted to cover day-to-day expenses, showing long-term economic growth. Raises interest burden. Higher borrowing increase interest payment, which further add to revenue expenditure and worsens the deficit cycle. Weakens fiscal discipline. Persistent revenue deficit indicates poor financial management and inefficient use of public resources. Creates inflationary pressure. Financing deficits through excessive borrowing or money creation can increase inflation in the economy, crowding out private investment. Large government borrowing may raise interest rate, making loans expensive for private businesses and reducing private investment. Limits policy flexibility. High revenue deficit restricts the government's ability to respond effectively to economic shocks, emergencies, or welfare needs. Impacts credit rating. Continuous revenue deficit can negatively affect the country's credit rating, making external borrowing costlier. Burden on the future generation. Borrowing for consumption shift to today's expenses to future taxpayers, increasing their financial burden.